Thank you so much. We are fairly tight on time. We'll try to keep this short, crisp, interactive. So we'll get straight to some interaction after maybe 5-10 minutes. We've heard quite a bit about innovation, disruption, future. We're talking again of the future of IT services. Again, given in the interest of keeping it kind of crisp and focused, we'll try to define the future as something in the next 2-3 years. Because the easiest thing is, of course, to talk about like 10 plus years from now, where you talk about, we all fly around in automated cars, and, there'll be very high end of the value chain of services we'll be delivering, and nobody's going to be around to catch us, 10 years later and saying that you said this 10 years ago and it hasn't happened. So I'm going to just try and, bring up a few questions. You know that as far as the IT services, the IT BPM, we'll just call it IT in an all-encompassing way, but IT, BPM, BPO, various knowledge-based services which are there. That industry, the previous year, NASSCOM had estimated at about, it's a big industry of which $126 billion was exports, about 4 million people employed directly and indirectly, and there's consequential employment further down, which is more, which is, security guards and others that individuals employ and so on. So it's huge. It's a massive source of foreign exchange revenue. Clearly, it's a very critical area both for employment, for our national economic security. No question about that, and that's why I think there's been a lot of focus and a lot of interest in it. It started off maybe 25 years ago with very little government intervention, and a lot of people credit the growth of the industry to that lack of government intervention, lack of regulation, and all of that. Today, there is, of course, very high interest in a whole lot of things around it. So I'd like to just, straight away jump into this and ask you folks that today, we are part of a very global economy, and we are obviously reaping the benefits of that in terms of globalization. So India is supposed to get 55% of global outsourcing revenues. Okay, that's huge. Okay, on the other hand, we are seeing an increasing rise of nationalism, which is happening at various places. The United States is one example, India is another example. We've seen a number of very nationalist policies in India as well. There's data localization, there's the e-commerce policy, which has hit out at the e-commerce majors in the last month or so. There's a lot more in the offing, the Data Protection Act, this narrative about data colonialists, the multinationals who take citizens' data. And there is every possibility of retaliation coming in from the US, who says that, if you are not going to allow Indian citizen financial data to be processed outside, why should America allow American citizen data to be processed outside in India? And by the way, India processes a lot of that data. So that, coupled with this other emerging problem or opportunity, whichever way you look at it, of AI, machine learning, disruptions in a whole range of services which are very people dependent today, but increasingly going forward, there's going to be very significant disruptions, and clearly those will create new jobs, but they will also disrupt existing ones. So I'd like to very quickly like you to respond to how you see these two things playing out in the next maybe 1 or 2 years in terms of what is going to happen to existing workforce and existing kind of services that we play in, and how disrupted is it likely to get? And B, do you see this balkanization, apparent balkanization of the internet, this rising nationalism? On one side, we are getting squeezed on on-site services in the US with the visas and so on. On the other hand, there could be a possible retaliation which could squeeze offshore services, where even, GICs and, the India development centers and back offices could get affected. So how do you see this playing out? So quick responses from you, and then we'll get into a chat. Lula, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think a lot of broad words. So yeah, I think to net it out, right? I want to, though, start with, first thing is we've been here. I mean, there have been disruptions in the past. If I look at the two big ones that come to your mind, whether it's the Industrial Revolution or the Internet Revolution, it started with a disruption which actually changed societies. So Industrial Revolution brought about the urbanization of economies, and the Internet Revolution basically changed the way we work. So I think the important part is all of these technologies have a much broader impact than being confined to technology alone. And I want to net it down to 3 fundamental principles that are changing with this technology, right? Number one, I think all the digital transformation that we have been talking about, right? The outside-in digital transformation is now going to give way to the inside-out digital transformation. And what I mean by that is now companies have to look within, because no digital transformation is going to be successful unless enterprises have transformed at the core. And that the core is 2 things. The core is workforce. So the workforce has to transform to leverage technology and understand the digital transformation. And the second core is data. So companies have now realized that their best competitive advantage is to leverage their core franchise, which is data. And this one line, which is inside out becoming more prominent than outside in, has the macro manifestation of this imperative for skills to transform, companies to leverage data so that incumbents strike back, and the emergence of platforms. Okay, so that's number one. The second fundamental principle is operate is going to become as much important as innovate. The shape of work is going to change. See, a lot of today the IT industry is back office. Maintenance, of systems, of software, etc. Now, with the advanced instrumentation that AI, etc. are bringing in, and IoT technologies, the physical and cyber world, there's a lot of chatter between them. Our ether is full of that, and humans real time. Which means today a person who was doing an operate of a IT system is now suddenly having to cater across IT and OT. In telecom, it is, the dumb pipes vis-a-vis the content that goes on top of it. For factories, it is as much devices getting into the shop floor, and then the instrumentation that actually provides the software. In auto, it is as a user is driving, it's back in telematics that is talking to him real time, right? So I think that's the second fundamental shift, which is operate is going to be the manifestation of how technology is going to get a seamless experience to the user. The third part, so I said 3 fundamentals, right? Inside out to outside in, operate as much as innovate. And the third aspect is, I think the revolution that this is going to bring about is what is something that we've been most, wanting it to happen in India, is the creation of a higher order, knowledge-based professional services. And you can see that coming, right? You can see pharmaceutical companies now moving from just the IT of clinical trials to the medical subscription and the domain-based clinical trials. Auto engineering being here, right? So I think, what we're going to see and prepare for is in these 3 areas. Are people reinventing and skills, and we will come back to that. Understanding how the physical talks to the cyber. Third is preparing ourselves and getting up the value curve to actually now start to talk business value add. And this third one is going to have phenomenal societal impact, because suddenly it provides an opportunity for the rest of India to participate. You need not have a formal CS degree, you need not have, it is the ITI equivalence, but now across 20 industries. So to me, these are the 3 big areas. I don't know how you think of it.
Yeah, so I think that's wonderful. You've articulated 3 very key areas, and somewhere in the articulation of your second area, you mentioned another key point which was not in your headlines, which was data. And the core franchise of data, the core asset of data. Everyone's talking about data. Mr. Mukesh Ambani talked about data colonialists. There's data is the new oil. So and suddenly there's this realization that, oh, data, so even if maybe Google is providing great services on search, etc., what are they doing with our data? Because our data is our data. So data seems to be at the central, point, the focal point of this global nationalism wave which is kind of rising, and I'd, love for you to touch upon that. But let me have your views in first, Rajeev, on this, and also including on, I think you talked about rising up the knowledge chain. You're, of course, in an innovation lab, and, clearly you would relate very strongly to that. I'd love for your views on how that affects the work which is happening, which is not higher up that chain, and there are many companies and there are many people who are actually not high up on that chain, and they're not in the high end of innovation research and so on. So what happens there?
Sure. Question. Thanks, Prashanto. I agree with Lula. I'm going to echo a lot of points of her, but let me just divide again my thoughts into three silos, three categories. First is I'll approach from a technical category, right? We're all techno guys, we're all in our blood, we have technology and research there. So I'll probably address the first through technology now, and then I'll talk about non-technical aspects, right? The people, as Lula mentioned so appropriately, the people, the human HR aspects, the training, the education, the human. And third is probably the other factors, which, as you pointed out, Shanto, are to do with the rules, the regulatory regimes, and so on and so forth. Let me start very quickly with technology. So I always think we've been very fortunate. I'm one of those lucky ones who saw the first cell phone. We were in school. No, we were in high school. I was probably in college. Saw the first cell phones. And so it was a toy. It was beautiful, I mean, I remember in a meeting, the cell phone rings and it's a jazz song. And my colleagues are you crazy? There's a jazz song going on. And you're in a meeting. So we were so excited about cell phones, right? First cell phones we saw when we started working after our education. We were also lucky, the first internet. I've been a witness to the first email in India. Because when I was a student at the ISC Bangalore, Institute of Science at Bangalore, ISC, as you know, along with IITs, had an AirNet network, Educational Research Network. The first email in India came to the ISC labs, and I was at night as a student, one of the coordinators, I'm saying, wow, what is this? It's a game changer. So as Lula mentioned, we've been very fortunate, all of us in this room, because we are witness to disruptive, I would say exponentially disruptive technologies, such as mobile phones, internet, and there are many others I don't want to name. But let me come to the crux. I think it's a very exciting time for, as the title of the panel is, the future of IT services. So I think in my view, the first thing which has really made a big difference is something, as Lula pointed out, I'm going to extend that, and we call it Industry 4.0. Now, all of us are talking about data, so therefore there is big data analytics. Everyone today, a child is talking about machine learning. Teen mantras ho gaye, right? AI, machine learning, and deep learning. So, sometimes you say, oh my God, I better get out of that because everyone is talking about it. So that's the second dimension of Industry 4.0. And then the third, of course, is pervasive computing, pervasive systems, cloud computing, and of course, you have 3D printing and many others. So you have a concept called Industry 4.0, which is really a game changer. It's a very disruptive paradigm, because what companies like IBM and TCS, and I know these two well, so I can echo that, are doing is that they're now defining Business 4.0. So the Business 4.0 is really the conglomeration of the technologies, all the technologies, not only AI, machine learning, or data, big data analytics, but all the technologies in that multidimensional n-gon. And now you have to, and therefore that defines digitalization, right? So that's one key takeaway in the future of IT services world. You have to align with Business 4.0, but it's not only Industry 4.0, it's also throw in agility, throw in automation, and I think you pointed it out. Many of my colleagues pointed that out. Automation is going to be critical, right? You really want systems to be automated. So throw in agility, automation, and all the nice characteristics, the good adjectives, and you have Business 4.0. So if you don't do this, then you will lose the game in the future of IT services. So clearly, it is dictated a lot by technologies, as very appropriately put by Lula. The second dimension is the non-technical aspect. Let me come to the non-technical aspects. In this game, in this rat race, where changes are happening exponentially, so there was a question in the panel before, very ably addressed by the eminent panelists. The only way to solve the problem is be curious and be excited about everything every day. I see my daughters, they're young, and one is just giving a board exam next year, and they're excited about technology. And I'm saying, if I don't come to their level or learn basics of R or basics of Python, then I'll lose the race. So you have to be excited and curious about everything around you. Therefore, that leads to the human resources part. You have to evolve continuously. Finally, we are in a tough regulatory regime, the balkanization, as you put it, Prashanto. Well, is that a sad news? Not really. I think we have to solve those challenges as we move on. So, yeah, these are deterrents. These are probably showstoppers. May not be. Maybe they're just transient phenomena, and we have to solve them. So there are challenges. We have to solve them. I don't see them as real deterrents in course of the path of IT service.
Thanks so much. So I'm not sure what that bell was. It rang at 10 minutes out of our 30. So if somebody could let us know, do we have more time, or do we need to wrap up? So I don't know. I'll just continue until somebody actually pulls us off the stage, or until our time totally runs out. I want to just connect this to what both of you said, to the reality of the industry as it is and where it is headed. Quite a lot still based on BFSI, banking, financial services, and insurance, about maybe 45% or something. 4 million people. If you project forward 1 to 2 years, how do you see this industry? I mean, because the kind of disruptions which are happening, some of them are gradual, but then they suddenly jump forward. BPO, the BPM industry got disrupted very rapidly. The voice part of the BPO industry, which we fortunately were out of because a lot of the lower end stuff went off to Vietnam and so on, got very violently disrupted by technology, by IVR systems, automation, AI, etc. We are seeing that coming in here again. It's kind of slow, but then it might suddenly jump up. So going ahead into the next 1 to 2 years, what do you see these 4 million people doing? Will the 4 million people grow? Or will the IT industry services revenue grow? But this number will, because productivity will rise, because technology will be in use, and so on. So can you just project a lot of what you said to the reality of our IT industry and what it could look like the next 1 to 2 years? Would you like to go first? You have a mic there.
Yeah, I mean, you picked an industry which is very close to my heart. I spend a lot of time with both banking industry and insurance. So first, if I could net your question down, what's going to happen to this industry and the people who are employed in these industries?
Yeah, 1 to 2 years.
Yeah, in 1 to 2 years. I think the opportunity is phenomenal, because up until now, if you look at what we have been doing in the banking industry in India, out of India, is primarily a lot of back office work. And today, the biggest opportunity is in front of banking and insurance companies, because I come back to data as a fuel. 80% of the data today which is exposed is actually not exposed. It is dark data. And these are the units that actually sit on this kind of data. So I think what I'm seeing banks already do is re-platform themselves. They're using data as their core advantage and creating platforms and generating actually ecosystems and markets of their own. So what it is now doing to people who are working for banks, for example, is actually starting to create open architectures, open marketplaces. Every bank today primarily is floating an open marketplace. Bankers are becoming retailers, right? Bankers are actually starting to be the new order arbitrators, right? Same with insurance. I mean, look at the connections between insurance, weather, health, pharma, right? It's a massive ecosystem. So more generically, I think in the next 2 years, 2 things will happen to the jobs that people in India are doing. Number one, AI is going to be augmented intelligence, right? So which means jobs do not go away. Jobs will just be reinvented, right? 90%, 100% of the jobs will be reinvented. Tasks will go away, but jobs in themselves will create more opportunities. So people today who are working for BFSI, other than writing custom code or writing core banking applications, right, or doing the cognitive care centers today, are actually getting very quickly familiar with now transcending to changing the process, doing more workflow related work, whereas most of the routine work is getting automated, because every bank has to change workflows today. The way in which they were dealing with their supply chain is completely new. We are, as company today, involved in probably 3 or 4 of the largest banks here. Some of them are the largest public sector banks. You can imagine the volume of work. You are re-engineering processes, you are reformatting front ends, you are changing the way cognitive, the call centers work today. So they are actually employing more people than what they have been doing in the past. And that's the kind of change that's going to come through. People who understand AI, people who understand data are now working with chatbots, are revolutionizing the way the process and call centers work.
So can you just let us know how are we on time? Because okay, all right, fair enough. So I'll just let you close with the same question you can use in your closing comments. The basic question was, and I think Lula has set the ground for that part of the answer, that yes, there will be new jobs created. Now the question is, can, for example, with these 4 million people, can a significant number of them be trained? If you look at the extreme example of, say, the e-commerce industry, which is getting in millions of people into logistics, at some point if there's automated delivery, etc., their jobs get disrupted. Now you say there will be people designing those drones, so those are jobs, but these people will not be retrained for that. That's a huge problem, isn't it?
Well, let me just reorient from what Lula said. I completely agree with what Lula said. See, I think I see a bridge which connects the old legacy systems and the new systems and the new paradigm. I already mentioned the new paradigm is Industry 4.0, Business 4.0, and all that jazz, right? So that's the right-hand side. The left side is all the existing, well-known legacy paradigms, servers, databases, mainframes, right? And so this bridge that connects the two requires a lot of talent, requires a lot of expertise. That bridge is really like, as we call it in computer science, von Neumann. It's not a bottleneck now. You need to train people to connect the two. Let me give you an example. This is a real example from my life. This young fellow is a class 10th graduate. Can't name, of course. And I spent time with him. I know this guy in Bangalore. Class 10th grad didn't even find the need to do 11th and 12th. And we all said, oh, we wasted our time studying for 30 years in our life. The guy is class 10th grad, says, well, I have to do well in IT. Let me master mainframe. So he learns the basics of mainframes. Today the guy is in China, and trust me, his salary is on par with many of us in this room. And then he looks at me and says, Rajeev, we really worship you guys, PhDs and all that. I'm saying, God bless. I really don't have any comments over there. But I think to answer your question, there is a paradigm shift. There is a whole revolution going on there. Class 10th guy trains on mainframes and is getting $1 salary in China or Malaysia and Philippines or Indonesia. And you're saying, well, do we really need a deep specialization? So that bridge is very critical. We have to reorient. We have to figure out, we have to evolve continuously. But that's to it every level, not just for the 4 million people out there, for everyone today in industry. You don't reorient, you are faded away. You won't be thrown out. India is that way, a very nicely, very great culture here, but you'll fade away with time.
Okay, I think, but we might be thrown out of here soon, so we don't need to wrap up. So thank you so much. I'm sorry to have to rush this. I think we are running a bit late, etc.
Just running a bit late, but yeah. Thank you very much. It was very, very engaging.